If I were to tell you that the United States was preparing to declare economic war on its best friend, its biggest customer, and its closest neighbor, you'd think I was describing a geopolitical suicide mission. Why would Washington even consider 100% tariffs on Canada? A move that would instantly bankrupt American automakers, double the price of food in the Midwest, and trigger the worst recession since 1929? The narrative you're being told is that this is about fair trade or border security. But that is a smokescreen. The real reason for these tariffs is far more calculated, far more dangerous, and it has almost nothing to do with Canada itself. The United States is preparing to sacrifice the Canadian economy to win a much larger war, a war for the very survival of the American century. Welcome to the hidden reality of the North American endgame. This is the shocking reason why 100% tariffs on Canada are really about China. To understand why Canada is in the crosshairs, we have to look at the back door of the Pacific. For decades, the ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert have been the crown jewels of North American trade. They are the fastest, most efficient gateways for goods coming from Asia into the American heartland. But in the last 5 years, something shifted. These ports didn't just become gateways, they became Chinese bridgeheads. While the US was busy slapping tariffs on Chinese goods, China was making a quiet, multi-billion-dollar play for Canadian infrastructure. Today, the massive cranes that move every single container in Vancouver are manufactured by ZPMC, a Chinese state-owned firm that the US has flagged as a national security threat. The software that tracks the cargo, the rail lines that carry the goods, and even the terminal operators themselves are increasingly tied to Chinese state interests. Washington isn't worried about Canadian lumber. They are worried that Canada has become a Trojan horse. They see a future where China doesn't need to fight the US at the border because they already own the logistics that feed the American interior. The 100% tariff is the nuclear option to force Canada to purge Chinese influence from its ports or be cut off from the American market forever. The vulnerability is not the trade itself. It's the fact that the US no longer trusts the hands that move the trade. And then there is the battle for the battery belt. We are currently in the middle of the greatest industrial shift in history, the transition to electric vehicles and green energy. And this is where the conflict gets truly shocking. In early 2026, the Canadian government made a strategic gamble. They signaled a willingness to lower tariffs on Chinese EVs and to allow Chinese battery giants like KTL to build massive factories on Canadian soil. For Ottawa, this was about jobs and becoming a green energy superpower. For Washington, this was an existential betrayal. The US has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on the Inflation Reduction Act to build a battery belt in the American Sun Belt. If Chinese companies can set up shop in Ontario, use Canadian labor, and then ship those cars and batteries across the border duty-free under the USMCA, the American EV industry is dead before it even starts. The 100% tariff is not a negotiation tactic. It is a preemptive strike. The US is telling Canada, you can have Chinese investment or you can have the American market. You cannot have both. Washington is willing to burn the North American auto industry to the ground if it means preventing China from owning the future of transportation. Open loop. But the ports and the cars are only the visible symptoms. The most dangerous backdoor is something you can't see: the critical mineral chokehold. As we've discussed, Canada is a treasure chest of the minerals needed for high-tech warfare: lithium, cobalt, nickel, and uranium. The US defense industry needs these minerals to build the missiles and jets that are supposed to deter China. But here is the shocking reality. Even though the minerals are in the Canadian ground, the companies that own the mines are often Chinese. Despite recent crackdowns, Chinese state-owned enterprises still hold significant stakes in some of Canada's largest mining firms. In some cases, the minerals are mined in Canada, shipped to China for processing, and then sold back to the US defense industry. Washington has realized that its own Fortress America is being built with materials controlled by its primary rival. The 100% tariff is the ultimate leverage to force Canada to nationalize or forced sell these Chinese assets. The US is using economic force to turn Canada into a protected resource zone for the American military, and they are willing to bankrupt the Canadian mining sector to make it happen. The vulnerability is not a lack of resources. It's the fact that the US is currently paying China to build the American military. This brings us to the poison pill of Article 3210. In the 2026 review of the USMCA, the US has doubled down on a specific clause that allows any member to cancel the trade deal if another member enters into a trade agreement with a non-market economy, which is code for China. The lie being told in Ottawa is that Canada can balance its relationship between the two superpowers. The reality is that the US has already decided that neutrality is no longer allowed. By threatening 100% tariffs, the US is testing Canada's loyalty. It is a loyalty test on a continental scale. Washington is watching every move the Canadian government makes, every airport bid, every 5G contract, every mining permit. If Canada flinches, if it tries to play both sides, the US is prepared to pull the plug. The US is lying to itself about needing Canada, but it is telling the absolute truth about its willingness to destroy the relationship to stop China. They would rather have a bankrupt, isolated neighbor than a prosperous one that acts as a conduit for Chinese power. The vulnerability is not Canada's deals with China. It's the American paranoia that those deals are part of a 50-year plan to dismantle the US from within. Finally, we have to talk about the 51st state strategy. In early 2025, a shocking proposal began to circulate in Washington. The idea that if Canada cannot secure its own borders and its own economy from Chinese influence, the US should treat Canada not as a sovereign ally, but as a territorial dependency. The 100% tariffs are the first step in this economic annexation. By making it impossible for Canada to trade with the rest of the world and making it prohibitively expensive to trade with the US, Washington is creating a manufactured crisis. They are forcing the Canadian public to choose between total economic collapse or total alignment with American policy. It is a strategy of coerce to cooperate. The US is using the 100% tariff as a cattle prod to drive Canada away from the Pacific and back into the American fold. They are gambling that Canada is too small to resist and too integrated to leave. So why is this happening now? Because the US has realized that the great decoupling from China is impossible if Canada remains an open door. You cannot build a wall around your house if your neighbor keeps leaving the side gate open. The United States is a superpower in retreat, trying to build a fortress. Canada is a middle power that has spent 30 years trying to be a bridge. In a world of total conflict, bridges are the first things that get blown up. The next time you hear about 100% tariffs on Canada, don't look at the border crossings in Windsor or Buffalo. Look at the shipping manifests in Vancouver. Look at the ownership structures of the lithium mines in Quebec. Look at the battery contracts in Ontario. Because in the end, the shocking reason for these tariffs is that the US is no longer fighting for fair trade. It is fighting for continental control. It is a battle to ensure that the North American continent remains an American fortress. And if Canada has to be the collateral damage in that fight, Washington has already decided that it's a price they are willing to pay. The US and Canada were once a partnership of trust. But in the shadow of the Chinese dragon, that trust has been replaced by leverage. And 100% tariffs are the heaviest leverage in human history.